All right, so let's write down our identifying information for number 159, and we're also going to write it down for number 160. It's kind of the biggest mystery in the world why College Board separated these two out. So 159 overall at the top, right? This is the city of Cuzco, and that is in the central highlands of Peru. The culture is Inca. You can spell this with a C or with a K. And then 1440 is when this is all established. So the first thing we're going to identify is the curved Inca wall of Coricancha with Santo Domingo Convent. So what I want you guys to write down underneath or on the side around there, this is the Inca main temple. And then, when they are taken over by the Spaniards, by the Spanish, they bring with them their religion. So then a convent is added. That's the Santo Domingo Convent. In 1550 is when the construction for the convent is added till 1650. And then the bottom is walls at Sacsayhuaman. All right, 160 is maize cobs, Inca, 1400 to 1533. This is sheet metal, and then there's a technique we're going to learn about called repoussé. And this is gold and silver alloys. All right, so about the spelling of Inca. Inca is how the Spanish chroniclers spell the name. The second is how many modern Cahuca speakers have chosen to spell it, and both are correct. Okay, so there's a couple different things about Inca versus Inca. I also asked on the Art History Facebook group, and all of the Khan Academy articles and videos are by Beth and Steve. So Beth also answered me, which kind of felt like a big deal. I feel like she's famous. So she said the bottom Inca with a K is gaining traction as it is felt to reflect the sound unambiguously, like more based on what the native people would have called it maybe. All right, again, I'm really overwhelmed when I teach these whole cities or complexes. So we're going to be reading the Khan Academy article and then going back over to the PowerPoint. All right, at the breathtaking elevation of 11,200 feet, the city of Cuzco was not just the capital of the land of the four quarters, the Inca name for their empire in their native language, Cahuca. I'm pronouncing things wrong, guys, I'm sorry. It was an axis mundi, we've heard that before, the center of existence and a reflection of Inca power. The city was divided into two sections. So first of all, in my notes, I wrote for context that this is the center of the Incan Empire, was the capital, Cuzco. And Cuzco means navel of the world. Remember, your belly button is your navel, that's the center. This is also considered an axis mundi, the center of the universe. So this is the capital of their empire, is the center of the world, the axis mundi. I also said that this is located high in the Andes Mountains at the elevation of 11,200. Okay, the city was divided into two sections, Hanan, which is the upper or high, and Huron, which is lower, right? So you're dividing a section into the upper class and then kind of the lower class, which paralleled the social organization of Inca society into upper and lower, I don't know, what is this word? Moieties, which just means social divisions. Cuzco, I almost said Costco. Cuzco was further divided into quarters that reflected the four divisions of the empire, and people from those sections inhabited their respective quarters of the city. In this way, the city was a map in miniature of the entire Inca Empire and a way for the Inca rulers to explicitly display their power. So this is again how architecture and urban planning is reflecting power to shape and order that empire. Some scholars think that the city was deliberately laid out so it's shaped like a puma, symbol of Inca might, but this is still under debate. All right, so here's some visuals about what we just talked about. So this is an idea of why they think that it was laid out to resemble a puma. All right, Inca Cuzco resembles the form of a giant puma with Sacsayhuaman Hill as its head, the city as its body, and the confluence of the rivers as its tail. People today refer to the neighborhood between the two rivers as Pumac Chupan, meaning puma's tail. So I would label this on your note page. You have Sacsayhuaman, which is the picture we have on the bottom right, but that is at the head of the puma. And then your city is divided. So I want you to divide your city between the upper, and then you have the lower, and everything I highlighted is considered the lower. And then in the lower, interestingly enough, is Coricancha, which is the main temple. I think that'd be in the higher, right? So this is reflecting social stratification, which is a kind of social differentiation whereby members of society are grouped into socioeconomic strata based upon occupation, income, wealth. You know, it's not very different from what we see today. So what we need to write down is the city organization, the layout of their city reflects extremely hierarchical organization or society. And then this is a picture of my note page from last year. So you can see I divided it. And then I have the lower, I wrote about the tail, or I highlighted the tail. And then city organization reflects extremely hierarchical organization, reflects Inca power. Okay, the masonry of Cuzco, and masonry is just stonework. So the stonework of Cuzco displays an understanding of stones as being like people, in that many different ones may fit together if they are properly organized. Each individual stone was pecked with tools and fitted to the one next to it, with the result that blocks will have a varied number of sides, such as the famous 12-sided stone in the walls of Hatan Remoyo Street. So here's a picture of a 12-sided stone. Some sides of each stone were made to curve outward slightly and others to be slightly concave so that the stones slotted together while still allowing a small amount of movement. The ability to move a little was important in an area that is seismically active, protecting the walls from earthquakes. So here's what I added in my notes from what we had just read. The masonry, so the stonework of Cuzco, displays an understanding of stones as being like people. Kind of thought of this as the content, in that many different ones may fit together if they are properly organized. Also know that no mortar was used. So it's really just the fit of all of these. The irregular sized stones without mortar actually provided more stability because of allowing for a little bit of movement for earthquakes. This is also called ashlar masonry. So go ahead and write down that vocabulary term. We're going to see it again in this African architecture, and it's just stones or bricks being fit together without using mortar, which is what we use today. Another thing that helped provide stability and helped all this stay together throughout all of the earthquakes is having these trapezoidal doorways. So doors, windows, and niches are trapezoids. And then I actually drew this in my notes. So if you want to draw it, you know, think about these lines and you could shade it. So this is an example of the trapezoidal architecture that the Incans used. All right, the function of Cuzco, not only the Inca rulers and their nobles resided in Cuzco, local leaders from all sections of the empire also lived in Cuzco, often compelled to do so as a means of controlling their home populations. Girls and young women were also drawn from across the empire to the capital to serve as the chosen women, to weave fine cloth for gods, and nobles to make corn beer. So there's our first reference to corn, which again, the next piece, maize cobs, is depicting. For religious rituals, to serve gods in shrines, and in some cases to be given to Inca favorites in marriage. Lucky. Young men were also brought to Cuzco to be educated and raised in the Inca culture. When they returned to their homes, they would be valuable advocates for Inca traditions and power. In addition to the Inca gods and ancestor mummies kept in the capital, there were also the captured gods of subject peoples, brought there as another means of controlling the followers. So it says it twice in this paragraph. A means of controlling their followers, and then it was up here as a means of controlling their home populations. So again, this was all about power and control. The elite to be brought here and then some of them sent back. They would have been educated in the traditions of Inca culture as a means to control the followers or the home populations. That's your function. All right, Coricancha. Look how different these stones look, you guys. At the heart of Hurin, remember Hurin is the lower part. At the heart of Hurin Cusco was the Coricancha, which means golden house. So I would write that down next to Coricancha. The most sacred shrine of the Inca, go ahead and write that, dedicated to the worship of the sun. Write it. While the Inca had many gods, they claimed descent from the sun. Ooh, can you think of other people that also relate themselves to the sun? I can think of two. All right, while the Inca had many gods, they claimed descent from the sun, whom they called Inti, and held the sun's worship above all others. The Coricancha was the center point of the empire. Okay, so that's why, even though it's in the lower. And from it radiated imaginary lines called saques, which connected it to shrines throughout the Cuzco Valley. All right, so I'm going to show you visual what that looks like. Okay, so here's an example of what the, I don't know how to say that word, the sec system would have looked like. And again, the description is 42 sight lines radiating from the Coricancha, or the Temple of the Sun. That's the religious heart of the Inca Cuzco. These sight lines connected the capital to then sacred shrines known as huacas. And then again, have in your notes, Coricancha is the main temple, and it also means the golden house. All right, after the conquest, the Coricancha was one of many Inca shrines turned into a Christian holy space. So I would add this for context, why we have the Santo Domingo convent added. The monastery and church of Santo Domingo were built around and on top of the original shrine, incorporating the old structure into the new one in a way that makes for a strange appearance today. Parts of the old temple are still visible, inside and out, alternating with Spanish Baroque architectural features. So this is going to be a common theme. We're going to see this with a mosque in Cordoba, Spain, where a cathedral was just built right in center of the mosque. We have Hagia Sophia, right, when the Ottoman Turks, it was built as a church. When the Ottoman Turks conquered, they turned it into a mosque. So this idea of conquering cultures or conquering people coming in and repurposing the architecture to reflect the new religion. All right, so here's some more pictures where you can see that Spanish Baroque architecture of the Spaniards that came and conquered the Incans. And then we're going to add this. Architecture reflects a common theme in art history, victors repurposing architecture. And then you don't need to write all this, but if you want to know some dates about the Spanish conquest, it's 1520 for the Aztecs, 1533 for the Incans. When this happens, it begins the sharp decline of the Native American population. Because of conquest, it brings in diseases, 90% decline of the native population, ending of cultures and traditional ritualistic practices. Okay, but more about Coricancha and why it was also so different looking from the rest of the masonry, the stonework. So the exceptionally fine masonry of the Coricancha was reserved for the most important buildings, since it was even more time-consuming than regular Inca stonework. Rather than fitting each stone together as an individual shape, creating an irregular-looking surface, here they were shaped into even courses of rectangular blocks and polished to a smooth finish. The walls were then covered in sheets of gold. So what would happen when the light would reflect on this building? Right, to signify the shrine's dedication to Inti, the sun god, and would have reflected the sun's rays with a blinding brilliance. So we need to add something about this to our notes, that the stonework, the masonry was different. So you can see in this photo, right, there would have been gold laid all on top of this. But the spectacular, radiant exterior was not the apex of the building's wonders. Inside, a reproduction of the world in a miniature took the shape of a garden made from gold, silver, and jewels, with people, animals, and plants. So on the other side, you have that art piece called the Maize cobs. This would have been inside that garden. The riches of the Coricancha would be taken in the looting of the city following the Spanish conquest and melted down for their precious materials. So I think that's important as well. You can summarize that. Everything looted and melted down with Spanish conquest. All right, last part of Cuzco, the Sacsayhuaman Wayman. Remember, this is at the head of the Puma, the highest elevation. Look at those rocks. Sacsayhuaman looks down on the city of Cuzco from the northwest. The structure, with its zigzagging walls, you can kind of see in our photo on the bottom of our note page, is described as a fortress. Although there are still many questions as to how it functioned in that capacity, and the purpose of some of its features is debated, it is possible that it was never finished or that parts of it were left incomplete at the time of conquest. The stones used to construct it were much larger than those used in the streets and houses of Cusco, as can be seen in the photo above. The stones were quarried and hauled into place using considerable manpower, which tells us it's important. The same thing as Stonehenge, right? All those stones were brought in and quarried from really far away. Therefore, we are deriving importance. So as historians, we are saying this is important because these stones, a lot of labor went into this. Obtained through labor tax that all able-bodied people of the empire owed the Inca. So let me see what I put in my notes. Okay, so I'm reading my notes down here at the bottom. Sacsayhuaman is the highest point of the city, located at the Puma's head. Function is possibly a fortress. For form, I would write it has zigzagging walls, huge stones, and then we should be able to compare the stones, right? You should be able to compare the masonry between the stonework in Coricancha and then the stonework at Sacsayhuaman. So at Coricancha, everything is smooth, they're placed in even rows, and it is showing more labor because it is a more important, it's the temple, right? Whereas the walls at Sacsayhuaman fitting each stone together as an individual shape, creating an irregular looking surface. And then here's a good photo of the zigzagging fortress walls. And no mortar is used. All right, so flip to the other side with your maize cobs, and we're going to take a few notes about the maize cob. Okay, here's a quick video of a doctor from Cuzco, a doctor of anthropology, talking about, and we're kind of seeing some ideas of what it would have looked like, the gold inside this temple of gold.
Cori es oro y cancha es una palabra quechua también que significa lugar.
So he just said Cori is gold and Concha is place. So Coricancha.
Pero se refiere mucho a estructuras que están abiertas y sin techo. Entonces es una cancha. La descripción mejor de Coricancha es la del Inca Garcilaso de la Vega, donde dice que en los jardines había representaciones de plantas, de cultivos, maíz, papas, todo hecho de oro y plata. Incluso había llamas y alpacas de tamaño natural hechas en plata y oro también. Entonces, ese espacio era jardín, o más lo que sería jardín hoy día.
All right, so we're going to write that down. So inside of Coricancha, the temple of the sun, there would have been a garden. That's what he's talking about. And it had miniature llamas, corn, flowers, and people, all made of silver and gold. So this maize cob, that's our piece, this is one of the few corn cobs made of precious metal that were on stalks made of gold that was in the garden of Coricancha in Cuzco. Okay, so the content, obviously what it's depicting is corn. Corn is a very highly favored crop, can grow at high altitude, which is good for them, and made special beer for royalty. And then the vocabulary we need to know here is repoussé. So there was a test question one year, and it had the maize cob, and it just asked about the technique. So repoussé is basically when you have sheets of metal, which is how this would have been made, and then you're hammering into the sheet of metal to create a relief on the other side. So repoussé is a metalworking technique in which a malleable metal is shaped by hammering from the reverse side to create design in low relief. So that's how this is made. This is life size with the stalk. So the ear of corn itself would have been about 10 inches. And then I asked on my Facebook group, why does maize cob get to be its own piece when it is included in the city of Cuzco? Right? Isn't this baffling? Other artworks are thrown in as a group. Chavín de Huántar has sculptures, the temple, and a metal piece. Templo Mayor has 3 other pieces included with it. The Church of St. Foy has the reliquary piece as well as all the architecture. What is so special about the dang maize cob? This baffles me and my students every year. I would love some insight. And so everybody says the exact same thing. Such an important crop to multiple American civilizations, part of likely religious ceremonials, rituals. Lacey Van Reeth said here, because it's amazing. Yeah, that's all I got. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Why do you think maize cob got its own number? What makes the maize cob so amazing?